Let's start with the super quick revision of the SEBI Act. First of all, the objectives of the Act, three most important objectives of the Act. Whenever I am telling you three most important objectives of the Act, just try to recollect the provisions in your mind also. First one was to protect the interest of the promoters, then to promote the development of the securities market, and then to regulate the securities market. These were the three first and foremost important objectives of the SEBI Act. Apart from that, we have other matters like regulating the recognized stock exchange, regulating the intermediaries, regulating the mutual funds, regulating all the other persons who come under the purview of SEBI, developing a code of ethics, developing a code of conduct for all the intermediaries. These are the objectives of the SEBI Act. For this purpose, we'll have to establish SEBI. Okay, so now what are the features of the SEBI? SEBI is in form of a body corporate. If it is in a form of body corporate, it is going to have perpetual succession and common seal. It can hold assets in its own name. It can deal in the assets. It can sue any other person, or it can be sued by any other person. This is how your SEBI is formed. Now, in the management of SEBI, there are going to be 1 to 1 5 persons sitting in the management of SEBI. One chairperson who will be nominated by the Union Government of India. 2 other members from the officers of the Union Ministry, that is from the central government. 1 person from the officials of RBI who will be nominated by the RBI, and 5 other members, 5 any other members, out of whom at least 3 should be whole-time members who will be nominated by the Union Government of India. So this way, here we are going to have 1 to 1 5 members who will be sitting in the management of the SEBI. Now understanding their appointment, their terms and conditions, their service conditions, etc. First of all, chairperson, very important, chairperson and the whole-time members, which we had seen, at least 3 whole-time members, their tenure will be 1 term up to 5 years. After that also the reappointment can happen, but maximum they can hold office is up to 65 years of age. Okay, similarly, okay, so we were talking about the chairperson and the whole-time members. First of all, their tenure will be 1 term up to 5 years. They can be reappointed after that, and maximum up to, they can act up to 65 years of age. This is what we had studied. Then after that, similarly, chairperson and whole-time members should not have any financial interest in SEBI, because otherwise it is going to affect their functions. Chairman and those 5 members should have special knowledge or experience in the fields of 5 things, that is ELAFA, economics, law, accounts, finance, administration. These were the 5 things in which it should be having knowledge or experience. Then CG has the power to remove these people. CG has the power to remove the members, that is the chairperson and the 5 other members, because of some specified reasons. And there are two ways of removing these people. Either central government will give them 3 months notice in advance that you are going to be removed, or central government is going to pay them 3 months salary and allowances, and they will be removed immediately. This is the way in which any particular person can be removed. And since we are doing for removal, we can also study simultaneously the reasons for which, or the reasons due to which the person can be removed. If that person is an insolvent person, if that person is of unsound mind, if that person is convicted of any offense involving moral turpitude, or if that person has abused his position which is detrimental to the public interest. If any one of the circumstances gets attracted, then that person can be removed after giving reasonable opportunity of being heard. Okay, this was about removal. Similarly, any of the persons from this management of the SEBI, these people can resign. Okay, and these people can simply give a resignation notice to the central government, and by giving 3 months notice in writing to the central government, these people can resign from the management of the SEBI. Okay, so this was about the removal as well as the resignation. Now let's study a few small points about this SEBI only. SEBI, since it wants to conduct the business, since it wants to regulate so many people, since it is going to regulate so many intermediaries, it will have to conduct meetings. It can conduct whatever number of meetings as specified, at whatever duration or at whatever gaps as given in the regulations. Okay. Next, Suppose if there is any particular member who is interested in the matter which is going to be discussed in the meeting, if there is any person who is forming part of management of SEBI, if he is interested in any matter which is going to be discussed in the meeting, whether directly or indirectly, and he has got some pecuniary interest, financial interest, then he will disclose it and he cannot participate in that particular meeting. Otherwise, again, the independence is going to be affected. And suppose if there is any vacancy, in the board, if there is any vacancy in the SEBI, maybe temporary vacancy or maybe a permanent vacancy, or if there is any gap in any particular place in between, then to the other people who are sitting in the management can still act. Means vacancies will not invalidate the proceedings. The work which is done by the other people will still be treated as valid, and and the proceedings will not be invalidated merely because of the vacancies. Now going on to the series of section number 11. Okay, in section number 11, the first one is powers and functions of the SEBI. There are going to be many subsections in that. First one, what is the duty of the SEBI? So duty of the SEBI, we are just going to duplicate it from the three main objectives of the SEBI, that is protecting the interest of the investors, promoting the development of the securities market, and regulating the securities market. This is the duty of the SEBI. Then after that, there are certain powers which are specifically vested with the SEBI only. Like it is going to regulate the recognized stock exchange. It is going to prohibit insider trading. It is going to prohibit the fraudulent or unfair trade practices. It will make sure that it promotes investors' education. Then it is going to call for information. It is going to levy charges. It is going to provide registration to its intermediaries. These are some specific powers which have been given only to the SEBI. Going on to the next subsection, subsection 2A, they say that SEBI also has the power to do inspection of books of accounts, but in case of listed company and proposed to be listed company, inspection can be done only if SEBI has got the reasons to believe or grounds to believe that the company is indulged in insider trading or fraudulent and unfair trade practices or market manipulation. Only then we can do the inspection of books of accounts of a listed company or proposed to be listed company. Okay, then subsection 3 is a very general section which says that SEBI has got all the powers as vested in a civil court, which we have been studying in so many chapters now. Subsection 4 says that suppose if during inspection, inquiry, etc., if SEBI comes to know that there is a particular matter, in which the checking should be done in detail, then the SEBI can start for investigation. Now, once the investigation starts, investigation is again going to be covered in section number 11C. The process of investigation will be covered in 11C. But after investigation, what can happen is SEBI can put restrictions on any members who are associated with a recognized stock exchange. SEBI can suspend any particular person. SEBI can impound and retain the proceeds of securities which we have earned illegally. SEBI can attach the bank accounts and the properties which are involved in this wrongful activities, and we can keep it with ourselves. Only that particular bank or the property which was involved in that particular offense. We can stop their trading. If suppose a company was involved, then we can even suspend its trading from the recognized stock exchange. Now, when we talk about this attachment of property which was involved in the offense, that can be done for a maximum period of 90 days. If it wants to continue it beyond a period of 90 days, then it will have to go and get a confirmation from the special court, and then we can continue with the attachment and we can use that property to recover the money from this defaulting persons. Similarly, we can tell any person that please do not sell it, just like provisional attachment. We can direct any particular person that I have a doubt on you. I have a doubt on you that you have done some contravention of the provision, so please do not sell this particular property, please do not sell this particular securities unless we complete the investigation in that. Apart from that, SEBI also has got the rights that it can impose penalty. It can impose penalty ranging from section number 15A to 15HB. It has got all those powers apart from doing this inspection, inquiry and investigation. And if suppose SEBI comes to know that we have done some illegal activities and SEBI wants to seize that profits, SEBI can seize those profits, SEBI can take up those securities, and this discharged amount will be credited. This discharged amount will be credited to the IEPF, that is Investor Education and Protection Fund. All these are the powers of the SEBI. Okay, all these are the powers of the SEBI. Apart from that, going on to the next section, that is section number 11A, which talks about the prospectus. Whenever we come up with any new issue or whenever we come up with a further issue, we are required to issue a prospectus to the general public by which we invite them to subscribe to the securities of our company. Okay, now what all content should be written in the prospectus will be as specified by the SEBI. SEBI can specify it by way of regulations. Like SEBI will write in the regulations that so and so things should be mentioned in the prospectus, and that is common for all the companies. That is general regulation which is going to be common for every company which issues the prospectus. Apart from that, SEBI can even issue a general order, or SEBI can even issue a special order for certain companies or certain class of companies that you have to include so and so extra points in your prospectus, or SEBI can even say that you are prohibited from issuing the prospectus, etc. So that is happening by way of a specific order which can be applicable on certain companies or certain class of companies. So basically SEBI has got the control over the prospectus which is issued by the companies to the general public so that they are able to protect the interest of the investors. Going on to the next section, that is section number 11AA, which talks about collective investment scheme, which has got 4 subsections. Subsection 1 says about the collective investment scheme, people who come under subsection 2, people who come under subsection 2A, people who are not mentioned in subsection 3, and some people who are deemed to be a CIS is equal to anyone who is not registered with the SEBI but has a corpus of more than or equal to 100 crore will be deemed to be a collective investment scheme. This is told by subsection number 1. Subsection number 2 says if 4 conditions are fulfilled, then you will be treated as a collective investment scheme. If you are pooling the funds with the intention to earn profits or returns, where the fund is being managed by someone on behalf of the investors and the investors do not have any involvement in the day-to-day activities. These people are deemed to be the collective investment scheme, or these people are considered as the collective investment scheme. Plus subsection 2A says that if you fulfill all the conditions as specified in the regulations, then also you will be treated as a collective investment scheme. And then last, the subsection 3 says that so and so people who are regulated by some specific acts, example provident funds, example insurance companies, example cooperative societies, NBFCs, mutual funds, nidhi companies, chit fund companies, NBFCs, companies raising money by way of deposits, or any other person as specified by the SEBI. If these are regulated by any specific acts, then they will never fall under the term called as collective investment scheme. Okay, this was the conclusion of your 11AA. Going on to the next section, that is section number 11B, which talks about powers of the SEBI to issue directions and to levy penalty, which is very, very important. In three cases, SEBI has got the powers to issue directions to all its persons. Okay, which 3 cases? First of all, to protect the interest of the investors, or if it is in the interest of the investors, to prevent the affairs of the intermediaries being carried on in a detrimental manner, to prevent that, and the last one is to secure proper management. Okay, for these 3 cases we can issue directions. Issue directions to whom? The directions can be issued to any person who is registered under section 12 of the SEBI. It can be issued to any listed company or proposed to be listed company, or it can be issued to any particular person who is associated with the securities market. Apart from this, SEBI also has the power to do disgorgement. If we have earned any wrongful profit or if we have tried to avoid any losses, then SEBI also has the power to disgorge that. We have already studied that, and that amount goes to the IEPF. Apart from issuing directions, SEBI has also got the powers to impose penalty on any such persons who are involved in any sorts of contravention. Then after that, going to section number 11C, which talks about investigation. Now, if SEBI, suppose during inspection or inquiry, if SEBI comes to know that we need to get into the detail of particular matters, then SEBI can order investigation if, in 2 cases, if the transactions are being conducted in a detrimental manner, not so good manner, or if any person who is associated with the securities market has violated the provisions of the act. Then in that case, SEBI can order investigation. For that purpose, we appoint a person called as investigating authority who is going to do the investigation. Okay, if someone comes for investigation in a particular premises, then it is our responsibility to, first of all, to preserve all the books of accounts, documents, etc., and then to furnish it to the investigating authority. Okay, they can, for the purpose of doing investigation, they can take our books of accounts, documents, etc. in their custody for a maximum period of 6 months. These people, the officers of the company, etc., these people can be examined on oath. Investigating authority has, just like civil court powers, it can, summon any person, call any person, take evidences on affidavits, can examine any other person on oath. If we do not, if we do a disregard with this person, if we do not obey the things told by this particular person, then that is treated as an offense. And for that, imprisonment up to 1 year or fine up to 1 crore or both can be applicable. And if we still continue doing that particular default, then there will be a fine up to rupees 5 lakh per day, which can be applicable till the time we continue the default. Okay, once that person does any questioning, etc. of us, then he will take down the notes in writing, he will read it out before us, and he will get it signed. Okay, once he get it signed from us, this can be used as evidence in the court of law against us or whatever. Okay, but that can be used as evidence against this particular person in the court of law. Now, during investigation, if the investigating authority realizes that we should not leave the books of accounts with this particular person, that person can alter it, modify it, falsify it, destroy it, secret it, etc., then investigating authority will go to the magistrate or the judge of the designated court. It will take the permission from there. It will take the seizure order from there. After doing that, it has got the powers. It has got the powers that it can enter any particular premises, search that particular premises, and to seize the books of accounts so that these are not left with the company anymore, and this can be returned till the conclusion of the investigation, right? Then after that, to all these things, for doing the investigation and for all these process, the code of criminal procedure, the provisions from the code of criminal procedure is going to be applicable. This is what we studied. But one important thing, seizure cannot be done of the books of accounts of a listed company or proposed to be listed company until unless we have got the reasons, that that company is involved in insider trading or fraudulent or unfair trade practices or market manipulation, as the case may be. So these were the provisions which were talking about investigation done by the SEBI through an investigating authority. Next, last section in the series of section number 11, that is section number 11D, which says cease and desist proceedings. SEBI can anytime, if SEBI thinks that any person is involved in violation of the provisions, if any person has already violated the provisions or he is likely to violate, SEBI can pass an order called as cease, that is, please stop doing this, or it can pass an order that please refrain from doing this, please desist from doing this, means do not do it again. Okay, but the cease and desist order can again be passed on a listed company or proposed to be listed company only in those cases, only if we are of the opinion that the company is involved in insider trading or market manipulation or fraudulent or unfair trade practices. With this, section number 11 series gets over. After that, going on to section number 12, which talks about registration certificate, which is very, very simple. There are many intermediaries in the entire securities law. Example, we have got a big list: stockbrokers, sub-brokers, recognized stock exchange, merchant bankers, underwriters, investment advisors, portfolio managers, credit rating agencies, underwriters, collective investment scheme, venture capital funds, mutual fund companies, etc. All these people, if they want to do any activities in the securities market, these people have to compulsorily get themselves registered. These people have to compulsorily get registered with the SEBI. And the new people who were added here was the things that you will study in your DT, that is REIT, InvIT, and your alternate investment funds, just like your venture capitals, etc. These people cannot issue any units. These people cannot issue any units until unless they have registered themselves with the SEBI. This was given in section number 12. Okay, then comes section number 12A, which is very, very simple, which says that please do not involve yourself in insider trading. Please do not involve yourself in unfair trade practices. Do not involve yourself in market manipulation. Do not involve yourself into any manipulative activities. Do not involve yourself into any fraud. Do not involve yourself in any such transaction which leads to contravention of any law. Do not involve into any transaction where you have acquired the shares, without fulfilling the provisions of the law. That minority and majority example that I usually quote, that if majority wants to purchase the shares from the minority, they have to do it as per the law only. So please do not get involved in any such activities which is contravening the provisions of the law or any particular regulation. Going on to the other procedures, which is now talking about finance, accounts and audit, section number 13, 14 and 15. The main source of income for the SEBI is going to be the grants which we are going to receive it from the central government. That is going to be the main income of the SEBI. For this purpose, SEBI is going to form a fund called as SEBI General Fund. The inflows are going to be from the grants. It is going to be from the fees and charges which is going to be levied and any other income which the SEBI earns. This money is going to be utilized for meeting some expenses like salary and allowances of the people who are sitting in the SEBI, for meeting the expenses of maybe inquiry, inspection, investigation, or for fulfilling the objectives of this particular SEBI. The fund is going to be used for that. Now going on to accounts. Will SEBI be required to maintain the books of accounts? Yes, it will maintain the books of accounts. SEBI is going to maintain it after consultation with the CAG. Okay, SEBI will get it audited from the CAG. CAG will submit the report. CAG will have the same rights and privileges which is there with the while doing the audit of government companies. And this report is going to be forwarded to the central government. It will be placed before both the houses of parliament and then it will be finalized. After that, going to section number 15, like 13, 14, 15 we have completed till here. Then going on to section number 15A to 15HB. 15A to 15HB is the series of section where if suppose any particular person has committed any contravention under the securities law, under the SEBI law, then in that case we'll be liable for penalties. A few sections which we are going to do up here is, first of all, section number 15A, where any person has failed to furnish certain information to the SEBI, failed to file any return to the SEBI, or done it but there was something which is incomplete, or he did it but he did it late, or he did not file it at all. If there is any such contravention which has happened, then such person will be punishable with penalty. That person will be liable for penalty, minimum rupees 1 lakh, which can go up to 1 lakh per day, but at a maximum cap limit of rupees 1 crore. This is one such penalty that you have to remember. After that, the next one, that is, if there is any particular contravention which is done by REITs, which is done by InvITs, which is done by alternate investment funds under section, then they will be liable under section 15EA. Okay, they will be liable under section 15EA. The amount of penalty, the basic amount of penalty is going to remain the same. That is 1 lakh to 1 lakh per day, maximum cap limit of 1 crore, or 3 times the profits that you have earned out of such contravention, or 3 times the amount that you have earned out of such failure. Out of these two, whichever is higher, this is one such another penalty that you will remember here. That is section number 15EA. Then after that, next one, section number 15F is super duper important. 15F talks about the penalties for default in case of stockbrokers. 3 kinds of defaults can happen. First one, it did not issue the contract notes in the specified format. Then 1 lakh to 1 crore. 1 lakh to 1 crore is the penalty that is applicable. Second one, if the intermediary, if the stockbroker has not given me the securities which he purchased on my behalf, or he is not paying me the money that he should have paid me on sale of securities, then in that case normal penalty will be applicable. That is 1 lakh to 1 lakh per day, maximum up to rupees 1 crore. And the last one is, if suppose the stockbroker is charging excessive brokerage, then minimum 1 lakh rupees will be applicable, which can go up to 5 times the amount of excessive brokerage that has been charged, whichever is higher. So 15F is super duper important out of all these sections. Next section which is very very important is penalty for insider trading. Minimum penalty will be rupees 10 lakhs, which can go up to 25 crores or 3 times the profits that we have earned out of insider trading, whichever is higher. This is another thing that you have to remember. Then similar penalty is going to be applicable for your fraudulent or unfair trade practices, just that there the minimum amount will be 5 lakhs. So 5 lakhs to 25 crore or 3 times the profit earned out of this contravention, whichever is higher. And the next one, section number 15HAA, section number 15HAA, which says where we have tried to do something wrong with the electronic database of the SEBI. Maybe we have tried to alter it, maybe we have tried to falsify it, maybe we have tried to introduce any virus in it, maybe we have tried to download or extract some data from their database, or we are helping some other person to do all these things, then that person will also be liable for penalty. Minimum was rupees 1 lakh, which can go up to 10 crores or 3 times the profit that we have earned out of this particular contravention, whichever is higher. Okay, the most important penalty out of 15A to 15HB is going to be 15F. No compromise with that. Okay, 15F is going to be super duper important. Then after that, going on to the procedural part now, power to adjudicate. Now, whatever penalties were introduced here from section number 15A to section number 15HB, these can be adjudicated by SEBI, but SEBI gets it done through an adjudicating officer who is not below the rank of division chief. He starts the questioning, he starts calling for information, he has got all the powers of civil court. He'll find out about the contravention and he'll decide upon the amount of penalty. SEBI does not have any power to reduce this penalty, but SEBI can enhance it, but maximum within 3 months from the date when the order is passed by the AO or till the disposal of appeal, whichever is earlier. While determining the amount of penalty, SEBI is going to consider certain factors, that how much penalty should be fixed at, like lower side, higher side, or what. The factors which it will take into consideration is, first of all, it will consider how much undue advantage has this person earned by doing the contravention, how much loss has been caused to the investors because of this act, and what is the repetitive nature of default. These factors will be considered by the adjudicating authority while determining the amount of penalty. Whatever penalties are collected, those penalties, be it a normal penalty or be it a settled penalty, which we will study later on, whatever that penalty is there, that will be credited to the Consolidated Fund of India. And we can even make a request. We can even make a request to the SEBI that, sir, I am acting in good faith, I am ready to disclose all the information and everything, if we can go for settlement. And if SEBI agrees, then SEBI can settle our penalty at a lower value. It can settle our penalty at a lower value, but whatever is the order passed by the SEBI, that is purely non-appealable, means nothing can happen once you have made an application for settlement. Okay, after that, getting into the next part of the chapter, which is talking about SAT, where they say that if there is any order which is passed by the SEBI and if we are not happy with that particular order, then we can go and file an appeal before the Securities Appellate Tribunal. First of all, Securities Appellate Tribunal is established by the central government. SAT has one main person called as presiding officer, and it has got some members called as judicial member and some members called as technical members. Whatever number of members, the CG is going to decide. Okay, but they function like they handle the cases in form of benches, and one bench is going to consist of at least one judicial member and one technical member, and these number of members can be increased. Depending upon the complexity of the cases. Going on to the qualification of these persons, out of that, the lengthiest one is of the PO, that is the presiding officer. A person can act as a presiding officer only if he has been a judge of Supreme Court, or if he has been a Chief Justice of High Court for a period of at least 7 years, or if he has been a judge of High Court for a period of 5 years. Right? If he has been a judge of Supreme Court, or if he has been a Chief Justice of High Court, or if he has been a judge of High Court for a period of 7 years, then in these 3 cases, he can act as a presiding officer. In case of a judicial member, he should be a judge of High Court. He should be a judge of High Court for a period of 5 years. And in case of technical member, there are 2 ways out. Either you are a secretary or additional secretary to the ministry or department in central government or state government or equivalent post, or if you are a person of proven ability, integrity, knowledge, skills, having experience of at least 15 years in the securities market and in the financial markets. These were the qualifications. Now, how are these people appointed? Now, we'll group it in 2 parts, presiding officer and judicial member. Presiding officer and judicial member will be appointed by the central government after consultation with the Chief Justice of India. And the technical member is also appointed by the central government after taking the recommendation from the search cum selection committee, which is going to consist of 1 chairperson and 3 different secretaries from 3 different ministries. If there is any vacancy in SAT, or if there is any vacancy in the search cum selection committee, then it is not going to invalidate any proceedings which have been conducted by the SAT. Everything will be considered as valid. And if there is any person who was sitting in the management of SEBI, now he wants to come and sit in the management of SAT, or if there was any member from IRDA or Provident Funds Law and now he wants to come and sit in the SAT, then he can come once his tenure there gets over, but only after a cooling period of 2 years. Now the people who are there into the SAT, that is PO is there, GM is there, TM is there, they can be appointed for one tenure up to 5 years, and they can be appointed for one more term of maximum 5 years, and maximum is they can work up to 70 years of age. For SEBI people it was 65, for SAT people it is 70. They will be paid salary and allowances, that will be as may be prescribed. In the act we are not going to study how much salary are they going to get, but one thing they have told is their salary and allowances should not be varied to their disadvantage. Means it should not be reduced for no reasons. It should not be varied causing any disadvantage to them. Now, if there is any vacancy in the place of these members of the SAT, then in that case, CG is going to fill those vacancy and the proceedings is going to continue from that particular point of time. And if there is any vacancy in the place of the presiding officer, then till the time the new member comes in, till that time the senior most judicial member is going to act in that person's place till the time the new person is appointed. Now, just like we removed the people, just like the people from SEBI resigned and they were removed, etc. Similarly, resignation and removal is even applicable for the SAT people. Okay, first let's do about resignation. These people can resign by giving a notice to the central government, but they have to continue in the company till 3 dates, and out of 3 dates, whichever is earlier. Okay, first one, till 3 months notice has to be given, or till my successor enters upon the office, or till the expiry of my tenure. Out of these 3 dates, whichever is earlier, till this date I will have to continue in this particular SAT. Okay, now can I also be removed? Yes, so CG can remove me, but only after an inquiry has been conducted by the judge of Supreme Court and only after giving me a reasonable opportunity of being heard. 4 points will take it up from the SEBI itself, that is insolvent, physically or mentally incapable, abused his position which is detrimental to public interest, convicted of any offense involving moral turpitude, or if he has acquired any financial or other interest which is going to affect his functions. In this case, that particular person can be removed, and more points about terms and conditions, appointment, removal, resignation will be given in the budget, will be prescribed by the provisions of the Finance Act. And suppose if there was any mistake, in constitution of the SAT, if there was any defect in the constitution of SAT, then CG will not be held liable for that. Even though CG only did this thing, CG only did the appointment, etc. But no order of CG will be treated as invalid just because there was any defect in the constitution of SAT. You can simply rectify it. Okay, there will be the order which is passed by the SAT, the order which is passed by the CG will not be considered as invalid. Everything is going to be treated as valid only. Okay, just like in SAT, we have the PO, we have the GM, we have the TM, etc. Similarly, in SAT, we are going to have staff also who are going to do the lower level work. These people, these staff will be appointed by the CG and they are going to work under the control of the PO, who is the head. They are going to work under the control of the presiding officer, and they will be paid salary, allowances, their terms and conditions will be as may be prescribed. Here we are talking about the employees of the SAT, not the people who are sitting in the management of the SAT. Now, what is the purpose of forming SAT? If we are aggrieved by the order of SEBI, or if we are aggrieved by the order of adjudicating authority who passed the penalty order, or if in other laws, if we are aggrieved by the order of IRDA or that Provident Fund Authority, then in that case, we can go and file an appeal to the SAT within a period of 45 days along with the fees from the date of receipt of the SEBI's or the AO's order. If there is any sufficient cause, then this delay can be condoned even beyond a period of 45 days. One thing that I would like to add up here is, wherever in the particular SEBI law there are no time limits given, we will go and take the time limits from the provisions of the Limitations Act 1963, which is going to be mentioned later on in the chapter. Once a matter goes to the SAT is going to make all the parties come. Then it can confirm the order, it can modify the order, it can set aside the order, and it will try to dispose of the appeal within a period of 6 months. It has to do it as expeditiously as possible and will try to do it within a period of 6 months. SAT has got all the powers as vested in a civil court, plus it will be regulated by its own procedure. That is, it can make more laws, more rules, more code for itself. SAT is treated like a court only. So every proceeding which is going on before the court, before the SAT will be treated as a judicial proceeding. And suppose if there is a dispute amongst the JM and the TM, then in that case, either the PO will come into picture and we will take a revised majority, or we will introduce, the PO will introduce a new member and then we take a revised majority and the matter will be decided accordingly. If we do not know how to go and represent before the SAT, then in that case, we can appoint CA, CS, cost accountant, legal practitioner, or any officers of these people also who can go and represent before the SAT. Limitations I have already told you, wherever no time limit has been specified in the law, in that case, we will go and check the provisions of the Limitations Act 1963. All these people of the SAT plus all the people who are sitting in the SEBI, which is going to be an upcoming section, the PO of the SAT, JM, TM, even the people who are sitting in the management of the SEBI, all these people are treated as public servant as per the Indian Penal Code. And civil code, just like PMLA and other laws, civil court is not going to have any jurisdiction. It is not going to interfere into any other matters because the authorities have already been assigned into the law. Now, if we went and filed an appeal to the SAT, and if we are not happy, if we are not happy with the order which is passed by the SAT, then in that case we can go and file an appeal to the Supreme Court on any matter involving question of law within a period of 60 days. Plus this delay can be condoned by a maximum period of another 60 days, and we are not going to tell to the Supreme Court to dispose of the case within so and so time. Okay. Now, a few common provisions here. CG has the power to issue directions. Just like SEBI was issuing directions to its intermediaries, similarly, even CG has got the powers to issue directions to the SEBI from time to time, and SEBI will have to fulfill it. CG will do this after giving a reasonable opportunity of being heard, and the SEBI, these directions will be binding on the SEBI. If there is any malfunctioning in the SEBI's management, if they are not acting properly, if on account of any emergency, SEBI is not discharging its duties and functions properly, then CG can supersede. It means it can take over the management of the SEBI for a maximum period of 6 months. And after a period of 6 months, the management has to be restored back. The old management will vacate their offices, the new management will come into the picture. This can be done by the CG. This powers is there with the central government. Okay, just like intermediaries were supposed to file the returns with the SEBI, similarly even SEBI will be required to file these returns with the central government from time to time. Returns has to be filed from time to time, that is one thing. Plus SEBI will also have to file an annual report with the central government within 90 days from the end of the year, and once it comes to the central government will place it before both the houses of parliament. Okay, before 99 appeal, like if you are aggrieved by any SEBI's order etc., then you were allowed to go and file the appeal before the central government. Okay, earlier that was an old provision, but now if we are aggrieved by the SEBI's order under the SEBI Act, then we can go to the SAT, and next level is going to be the Supreme Court, right? Acha, similarly, here also the civil court is not going to interfere in between because civil court has not got any jurisdiction. If it does not have any jurisdiction, then any stay order can also not be passed by the civil court. Civil court does not have any jurisdiction at all. Okay, so it cannot interfere also, plus it cannot, no stay can be provided, no injunction. Injunction means no stay can be provided by any civil court. And just like I had told you, I had already told you for the members of SAT, similarly even for the members of the SEBI, they will be treated as public servant as per the Indian Penal Code. Now, one protection has been provided to the authorities, that is, if there are some people sitting in the RSC, if there are some people sitting in the SEBI etc., or if there are any officers who are there under the securities law, if these people have committed any mistakes in good faith, then we cannot proceed against them. We cannot file any suit against them. We cannot initiate any proceeding against them. This is a cover which is given to them that if they have done any mistake in good faith, they will be relieved. We cannot proceed against them. Okay. Then going on to the next point, which is talking about the offenses. Now, if there is any such act which is done by us, which does not lead to contravention, but which leads to an offense, then in that case, list of offenses will be provided. If we have done any such mistake for which no punishment has been provided, then for that we will be liable for imprisonment up to 10 years or fine up to 25 crores or both, if there is no specific punishment that is provided in the entire law. And suppose if penalty was imposed on us under section 15A to 15HB and that was adjudicated under section 15I, and if I fail to pay that penalty, then this act of mine will also be treated as an offense only, and I will be liable for imprisonment ranging between 1 month to 10 years or fine up to 25 crores or both. Okay, that is the offenses, 2 points which are going to come up here. Then these offenses can be compounded if we go and make an application. If we go and make an application to the court, that is special court or SAT, then if they think fit, then the compounding can be done. But compounding can be done only of the compoundable offenses. That is only those offenses where imprisonment is not mandatory. Only in those cases the compounding can be done. And the last relief that can be provided to us is the authorities can grant us immunity. Okay, which authority can grant me the immunity? The highest authority, central government on recommendation. Central government on recommendation from SEBI, if it thinks fit that we have disclosed all the facts, if we have disclosed all the true facts, then in that case it can grant us the immunity from the prosecution and the penalty. Okay, but this can be granted only if no proceedings have been initiated, nothing has been started against me, then only immunity can be granted. And it is not mandatory that the immunity will be granted. SEBI just gives a recommendation to the CG, and that recommendation is not binding on the central government. Okay, whenever we come across any particular offense, we want the court to step into picture and to take the case ahead. For that, we'll have to go and give the cognizance to the court. Okay, who can go and give the cognizance to the court? Central government can go, then SEBI can go, RSC can go, state government can go, or any particular authorized person can go and give the cognizance of that particular offense before the court that, sir, please start the case against so and so person. For that purpose, we established the special courts, just like we had established in the PMLA laws, etc. Also, for speedy trial of offences, we established the special court. The case goes to the jurisdictional special court. If in a particular jurisdiction there are more than one special courts, then the High Court will direct that the case is going to go to which special court. Before this, just like the powers which are there in the High Court, which comes from the Code of Criminal Procedure, same powers are going to be vested in the special court as well, because it was just a succession. Then whenever any proceedings are going on in the special court, that will be treated as judicial proceedings. Special court is nothing but your session court. It has got all the powers from the Code of Criminal Procedure. The person who is doing the prosecution before the special court, that person is called as the public prosecutor. He is a person who is a practicing advocate for the last 7 years, or who has got the knowledge of law or experience for a period of 7 years. He is eligible to do the prosecution before the special court. Until the time the special courts are not established in any particular area, till that time the session courts is going to continue in the picture. Okay, and what will be the qualification of the judges of the special court? Either they have to be a session judge or they have to be an additional session judge. Okay, this has to be the qualification of the judge of this particular special court. If there is any contravention which is done by the company under the securities law, then the person in charge would be guilty of that particular offense and they would be jointly and severally liable for that. But if any person proves that he was not aware about that particular offense, that happened without his consent, he had exercised due diligence to prevent such kind of offense, that did not happen during his tenure, then in that case the person can be safeguarded and no prosecution will be instituted against that person. If there was any penalty which was imposed on us, okay, if there was any penalty which was imposed on us, and if we are not paying it, then the authority will get it recovered from us. They will appoint a person called as recovery officer, to whom we will issue a recovery certificate in which the amount and the persons and the details, everything will be returned in that from whom are we supposed to recover it. It can be recovered in 5 ways: attachment and sale of movable property, attachment and sale of immovable property, freezing of bank accounts, detaining or arresting any particular person, and the last one is we can appoint a person called as manager to manage these properties, and that is to realize the best value out of it. And if just to avoid this recovery of penalty from these amounts, if I have transferred the properties to any person for inadequate consideration, that is to spouse, to minor child, to son's wife, or to son's minor child, then in that case we can even recover this amount from them. This we had studied in recovery of amounts. Okay, next one is continuation of proceedings against legal hire. So in that I had divided this into 2 parts. Suppose if penalty, if we want to recover the penalty from the deceased person, then we can recover it from the legal hire or legal representative of that particular person, provided the penalty was imposed when that person was alive. Okay, but if we want to discharge any amount from him, then irrespective of the fact whether the disgorgement order was passed before his death or after his death, we can still recover it from the legal representative, and the legal representative will be liable only up to the extent of estate that he has inherited from the deceased person. And the legal representative is never liable for imprisonment. He is never liable for imprisonment on behalf of the deceased person. Then we had a general section which said that SEBI does not exercise any powers, or we can say SEBI does not have any jurisdiction, or the powers of SEBI does not apply to the intermediaries or to the banks which are located in the IFSCs, because IFSCs are regulated by one is by the Act and the other one is by the IFSC authority. They regulate the people who are situated in the IFSC. So SEBI powers does not extend to them. Acha, CG has got the powers. This is very, very important. CG has got the powers to make the rules. These powers cannot be delegated to any other person. However, CG can delegate the powers to the SEBI to make the regulations. In either of the cases, in rules and regulations, these will be made and these will be presented before both the houses of parliament. Only once it is approved, then only those rules and regulations become effective. Along with SEBI, even other laws can be applicable. One example which I had given you was SEBI along with PMLA can be applicable. So SEBI can be applied along with other laws. It's not that if SEBI is applicable, then only SEBI will be applicable. No, it's not that way. And the next section number 34, you can totally ignore. That was a transitional provision that whenever any act is introduced, up to 5 years, CG can make changes in the law by way of notifications, to bring the provisions inconsistent with the provisions, so that inconsistent with the provisions of the law. They can do the amendments inconsistent with the provisions of the law, and they can make it simple for people to use the law. And below that you have been given the time period for appeals, which we have already studied. Two sections, section number also to be remembered, that is section number 15T and 15Z. 15T is where we go and file the appeal to the SAT, and 15Z is where we go and file the appeal before the Supreme Court. These time limits and this table has to be remembered here. And with this we are done. With the SEBI Act. I hope you are very, very clear with this. Yes, let's start with the super quick revision of FEMA 99. First of all, first part, that is basics, extent and applicability, section number 1. FEMA law is applicable to whole of India, including the state of Jammu and Kashmir. It also extends to any contravention which we have committed outside India. It also applies to the entity or any establishment which is located outside India but which is controlled by a person resident in India. So FEMA is applicable to whole of India, plus if there is any contravention which is done outside India, or if there is any particular branch offices which is located outside India which is controlled by a person resident in India, FEMA extends to that person also. Now there are a few important definitions coming up here. First definition, capital account transactions. Capital account transactions means any such transaction which alters assets or liabilities including contingent liabilities of a PRI which is situated or which is located outside India, or any transaction which alters the assets or liabilities of a PROI which is situated in India. All such transactions are treated as your capital account transactions, and the transactions which are not capital account transactions will be treated as current account transactions. Okay, few transactions which are deemed to be current account transactions are any transactions done in ordinary course of business in relation to foreign trade, or any transaction which pertains to short-term banking and credit facilities, or if we have done any remittances for living expenses, for medical expenses, for education abroad, or any transaction which pertains to interest transaction on loans or receiving return on the investments, then these transactions are deemed to be current account transactions. Now after that, the next important, you've got some examples given here in the book to identify whether a transaction is a current account transaction or a capital account transaction. Coming on to the next definition of person. Person definition is just like your income tax wala definition. It includes your individual, HUF, AOP, BOI, firm, LLP, companies, artificial juridical person, and most importantly, any particular office or any particular agency or any particular branch which is controlled by any of the above persons. If there is an individual who is controlling a branch, then even that branch becomes a person. Even that branch becomes a person. Next most important definition here is of the PRI, that is person resident in India. How do we identify whether a person is a PRI or PROI? So first of all, we'll check the basic condition. If there is any person who is residing in India for more than 182 days during the preceding financial year, then that person is by default treated as a PRI for the current year. Okay, we checked it for the last year. We checked the number of days stay for the last year and we concluded the status for the current year. But a person will not be treated as a PRI who is leaving India or who is going outside India, either for employment outside India or for business or vocation outside India, or if his intention to stay, or he is going for some other purpose where his intention to go outside India is for an uncertain period. So since he is going for a very long time in all the three cases, then he will not be treated as a PRI. Similarly, if there is any person who is coming to India otherwise than the same three purposes, means he is coming to India for some short-term things, then in that case, even he will not be treated as a PRI, then he will be treated as a PROI. So in short, if any person is going outside India for a longer period as mentioned here, he will not be a PRI for us. But if he is coming to India for a longer purpose, then yes, we will make him a PRI. So on those basis, we understood whether that person will be treated as a PRI or whether that person will be treated as a PROI. This point was applicable mainly to the individuals because number of days stay etc. will check for individuals. When we go to other persons, example company, firm, LLP, how do we determine their status? So if there is any person or any body corporate which is registered in India or incorporated in India, it will always be a PRI. Okay, if there is any branch, office, etc., which is located in India, but which is controlled by a PROI, then also that Indian branch, office, etc., will be treated as a PRI because of its location in India. Okay, but if there is any particular office, branch, agency, etc., which is located outside India, but which is controlled by a PRI, okay, which is controlled by us. Since it is controlled by a PRI, then also the office which is located outside India will be deemed to be a PRI itself. So either the location or the control, if it has some Indian connection, then in that case, we'll treat that person as a PRI. Okay, and if that person is not a PRI at all, then by default that person will be treated as a PROI. We don't have any specific definition for determining a person as a PROI. It's just that person who is not a PRI will be treated as a PROI. Then after that, a small definition of service. Whenever we talk about service, free service are totally excluded. Personal contract services are totally excluded, and services means anything which we make it available to the users. Anything, any service of any kind of description which we just make it available to the users, then that thing will be treated as a service. An intangible thing will be treated as a service. Then you have got certain examples on PRI, PROI, on determination whether that person is a PRI or a PROI, that can be tried. After that, going to section number 3 and section number 4. Section number 3 has got 4 pointers in it, okay, which are based on the examples that we have got in the textbook. Section number 3 talks about dealing in forex, which is the negative section, which says that no person shall deal otherwise through an unauthorized person in forex. Okay, if you want to deal, you can deal only through an authorized person. You can deal only as per the act, as per the rules, as per the regulations. You can do it only in that manner. Okay, there were 4 pointers here. First of all, if you want to deal in forex, you can deal it only through an authorized person. Example, if I want to purchase or sell forex, do it only through an authorized person. Okay, authorized person as defined in section number 10. Then after that, if you want to do any payment on behalf of a non-resident person, you cannot do that payment in India. Otherwise, that transaction becomes non-traceable. The transaction which is done by the non-resident, that becomes non-traceable. Next, if you want to receive any forex, you cannot receive it through any person except for an authorized person. Imagine someone telling me that I'll give you the fees in foreign currency. I cannot accept that as per section number 3. And last one, we should not be involved in any such financial transactions which are prohibited. Example was Hawala transaction. So these 4 points which is coming in section number 3, all these type of transactions are totally prohibited. We cannot deal in forex in these manners. If you want to do, it has to be done as per the act, as per the rules, as per the regulations, or only with the RBI permission. Otherwise, it cannot be done. Going on to the next section, that is section number 4, which talks about holding of forex. So first of all, they say that a PRI cannot hold foreign currency, foreign securities, immovable property outside India, except as provided in the act. By default, you cannot hold. If you want to hold, do it as per the act only. If you want to transfer, do it as per the law only. If you have earned something outside India, make sure that you realize and repatriate that amount in India. And after repatriating that amount, make sure that you surrender it. Make sure that you surrender it and you follow the provisions of section number 8. That is, you can hold forex only up to a certain limit. Rest of the amount has to be surrendered. So section number 3, section number 4 talks about dealing in forex and holding of forex. Right? Till here, your basic provisions get over in all respects. Now going on to the second part of the chapter out of total 5 parts. First part was your basics. Second part is going to be your current account transaction, which is super duper important as evident from here. Okay, now current account transactions, we have already seen the definition of current account and capital account transactions. So they are telling that if we want to enter into any current account transactions, we'll have to either draw forex or we'll have to sell forex, but that can be done only through an authorized person. And for this purpose, whenever we enter into any capital account transactions, we'll have to follow the capital account whenever we enter into current account transactions, we'll have to follow the current account regulations. Current account regulations are divided into 3 schedules. Okay, it talks about schedule 1, schedule 2, schedule 3. There are certain current account transactions which are prohibited. Okay, which are prohibited? First of all, any transaction which is given in schedule 1. Okay, any transaction given in schedule 1 of the current account regulations, those are totally prohibited. Plus any transaction which pertains to travel to Nepal and Bhutan, that is prohibited because INR works fine. And any other transaction which you are doing with a person who is residing in Nepal, Bhutan, or with an entity which is there in Nepal, Bhutan, even that will be prohibited unless you have taken a specific approval from the RBI. Okay, so basically schedule 1 transactions are prohibited and Nepal, Bhutan transactions are prohibited. Now let's try to understand which are some more transactions which come under schedule 1. So for this, we have to remember that there are total 8 transactions which are totally prohibited. Let's try to recollect those transactions. First one was, you cannot remit any amount out of lottery winnings from India. Similarly, you cannot remit any amount out of income from racing, riding, or any other casual income. You cannot remit any amount for purchase of lottery tickets, football pools, banned or prescribed magazines, etc. Then, if suppose you have entered into any transaction where you want to do equity investment in joint venture or your wholly owned subsidiary outside India, for that, if you have exported the goods in return to get that equity stake, you'll have to pay some cash. Instead of paying that cash, you exported the goods. So no export commission can be paid on that. Export commission is not allowed because this is a direct transaction. Next, dividend paid under dividend balancing system, that is totally prohibited. Then export commission paid under rupee state credit route with Russia, that is totally prohibited. But in that there was an exception that you can pay commission up to 10% on the invoice value in case of export of tea or tobacco. Okay, 6 points done till here. Then after that, payment for callback services is totally prohibited. Then after that, the last point, any interest income that you have earned out of the non-resident special rupee scheme account, even that has to be kept in India only, that has to be utilized in India only, and that cannot be remitted outside India. So Nepal, Bhutan plus these 8 points, these were totally prohibited current account transactions as per the regulations. Right, now going on to the second schedule, which talks about the transactions where we are supposed to take the prior approval of the central government of India. Means if you want to enter into these transactions, take the prior approval of central government, for which we had done a story code. In that first one, I saw and I wanted to go for a cultural tour. Okay, so whenever we are doing any remittances for the cultural tour, we'll have to take the permission of Ministry of HRD, Department of Education and Culture. Okay, for that I saw an advertisement. So if I want to do any remittance for advertisement in foreign print media, if it is done by state government or by a public sector undertaking, and if that exceeds 10,000 USD, then since it is advertisement, we'll have to take the approval of Ministry of Finance, Department of Economic Affairs. And in that, suppose if you are doing it for tourism, for promotion of tourism, for like calling for foreign investments, etc., then no such approval would be required. So I wanted to go for a cultural tour, for which I saw an advertisement, but since the traveling was costly, so I decided to go by freight vessel. So if you are remitting any amount of freight, and if that is such a freight vessel which is chartered by the PSU, then in that case, means taken on hire by a PSU, then we'll have to take the approval of Ministry of Surface Transport, and in that specifically we'll have to take the approval of the chartering wing. Then for that purpose, I had to contact an ocean transport agent. Okay, so now when I am doing the payment of import through this ocean transport agent, and when it is done by the by government on CIF basis, again we'll have to take the approval of the same person, that is Ministry of Surface Transport Chartering Wing. For that purpose, I contacted an agent. I contacted an ocean transport agent. So now here, suppose if there are certain transport operators, multimodal transport operators, if they are making any payment to their agents who are situated outside India, this is a recurring transaction. Since this is a recurring transaction, we will require a registration certificate from the Director General of Shipping. Okay, now I started going on this freight vessel, then my container got detained. So I had to pay container detention charges more than the limits as prescribed by the DGS. For making that payment, I again had to take the approval from Ministry of Surface Transport, Director General of Shipping. Okay, and then after that, since my container got detained, I tried to send signals through transponders. So now if we are hiring any transponders can be hired either by TV channels or by internet service providers. If it is done by TV channels, then in that case we have to take the approval of Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. And if it is done by ISPs, that is internet service providers, then Ministry of Communication and Information Technology. This is the particular ministry from whom we are supposed to take the approval. Okay, so now I gave signals to transponders. Someone came to my rescue for helping me, and that person asked for prize money. Right? So now I had to remit. Now whenever there is any particular sports activity which is happening abroad, for its sponsorship, if I am remitting any prize money, then in that case I'll have to take the approval of Ministry of HRD, Department of Youth Affairs and Sports, but only if the amount involved exceeds 1 lakh USD, and this point is not applicable when it is sponsored by any sports association or a sports body. Then this point is not applicable, because for them it is very normal, the sponsorship is very normal. And then the last one, since someone came for my since someone came to my rescue, that person asked for my prize money, and I paid that particular prize money for my protection. So if I am remitting any amount as membership fees for my protection to this protection and indemnity club as a member, then in that case I'll have to take the approval of Ministry of Finance, and in that insurance division's approval is required to be taken. These were all the transactions where we had to take the approval of the central government. In central government, we studied the respective ministries and the respective internal departments whose approval is to be taken there. Going on to the last schedule, that is schedule number 3, which talks about the transactions where we require the approval of the RBI. In that, first point that we are going to do is applicable for individuals. Okay, first point is applicable for individuals. Individuals are allowed a facility called as liberalized remittance scheme, where they can remit up to 2,50,000 US dollars outside India without even taking the approval of RBI. For more than that, we'll have to take the prior approval of the RBI. Now, for illustrative purpose, they have given certain examples which falls under schedule 3. Suppose if you want to go for a private visit to any country except for Nepal and Bhutan, if you want to give any amount as gift or donation, if you want to pay any amount for medical expenses, if you are going outside India for employment, if you are settling outside India permanently, emigration, if you are going for studies abroad, or if you are remitting some amount for maintenance of close relatives abroad, if you're visiting outside India for business, conference and all those purposes, if you were going for medical and if you're paying any expenses for the attendant who is going along with you, all the or any other current account transactions, which were not falling in schedule 1 and schedule 2, those will come in schedule number 3. For all these things taken together, you can remit up to 2,50,000 US dollars in a particular financial year. Okay, but for three things, that is, if you are going for emigration, if you are going for medical treatment, or if you are going for studies abroad, even if the remittance is more than 2,50,000 USD, then you need not take the approval from the RBI. You can draw that amount from the authorized dealer by submitting that proof that you have taken from the other country, that yes, the remittance is going to be of more than, or the expenses are going to be of more than 2,50,000 USD. Okay, this 2,50,000 USD, just remember, it is for all these purposes taken together. Okay, it is applicable to a single individual for a particular financial year for all these things taken together. Okay, then after that, there is a small concept of a person. Who is a PRI but not a permanent PRI. If there is any particular person who he should not be a national of Pakistan. Apart from that, if there is any person who has come to India for the purpose of employment on a deputation for a particular assignment and his tenure does not exceed 3 years, then he is a PRI, agreed, but he is a temporary PRI, he is not a permanent PRI. So whatever amount of salary etc. that he is earning here, he can remit it to his country after fulfilling all the statutory requirements of our country. That is PF contribution, taxes, deduction, etc. After that, he can remit that amount to his own country. Okay, then after that, one point that they have told us here is, just like we studied that this LRS of 2,50,000 is applicable only to individuals, then they make a statement here is, this LRS can be availed by any person other than individual also. Means other than individuals also, for these purposes they can avail the facility of liberalized remittance scheme. Then going on to the second part of schedule number 3, which talks about facilities for persons other than individuals. Facilities for other than individuals, and specific these 4 points have been given for them. First point is, if these people are going to remit any amount as donation for some specific purposes, for obtaining position in some reputed education institution, for contribution to some funds which are run by these educational institutions, or contribution to any such institute which is similar to our activity abroad, means they are also involved in the same activity in which I am involved, then in that case I can remit up to a particular limit without RBI approval. And what is that limit? 1% of the foreign exchange earnings during the last 3 years, or 50 lakh USD, whichever is lower. Up to this, if you want to remit, then no approval of RBI is required. More than this, then RBI approval would be required. Or if you are paying some commission for sale of some property in India, sale of some residential flats or commercial plots in India, for that if you have availed the services of a foreign agent, then in that case for one transaction you can pay him commission up to 25,000 USD or 5% of the sale consideration, whichever is higher. Up to this, without approval you can pay. If you have availed any consultancy services from outside India, and for that if you are remitting for infrastructure project, if it exceeds 1 lakh USD, means up to 1 crore USD, no approval is required. For more than 1 crore USD, you'll have to take the approval of the RBI. And if it is for any other projects apart from infrastructure projects, then up to 10 lakh USD you can remit. For more than that, you'll have to take the permission of the approval of the RBI. And the last one, if suppose there was a particular person who had invested in your company and he had borne your pre-incorporation expenses, and if you are reimbursing those pre-incorporation expenses, then up to 5% of the investment that he had brought, or 1 lakh US dollars, whichever is higher, up to this you can remit. More than this, you'll have to take the permission of the RBI. So these are the 4 specific points which are applicable to persons other than individual. For these 4 points, we have to follow this particular limit. For other things, these people can avail the facility of LRS, which we just studied now, that LRS is also applicable to persons other than individuals. Okay. Now, if there is any such transaction which was not specifically mentioned in the list of schedule number 3, then in that case, that will fall under the term called as other current account transaction that can be freely undertaken subjected to the LRS. Okay, if you want to do any remittances out of the RFC account, resident foreign currency account, then no approval is required. If you want to do any remittances from the EEFC account, then also no approvals of central government or RBI etc. will be required, that we have studied, except for 3 transactions. For 3 transactions, you still have to take the approvals. First one is for membership of protection and indemnity club, for commission to agents that you are paying abroad, and for reimbursement of pre-incorporation expenses. For these three things, you still have to take the approval, and even though the remittance is done out of EEFC account, then also the approvals will be required. And last, if you're going outside India, then the expenses can be met out of international credit card. There is no restriction, because since it is an international credit card, it is functioned by the bank only, and it comes under the purview of RBI, so no issues in that. Going on to the next thing, that is your capital account transactions. Capital account that is the third part of the chapter. Capital account transactions are given under section number 6 and are mainly regulated by the regulations. For that purpose, for entering into any capital account transaction, you will require forex. For drawing that particular forex, you'll have to go through an authorized person only. There are certain transactions which involve debt instruments. For that, how the transaction is to be done, whether it is permissible or not, that will be notified by the RBI after consultation with the central government. There are certain transactions which does not involve debt instruments. Those will be notified by the provisions for that will be given by the central government after consultation with the RBI. If there is any PRI, I can still hold some properties outside India, some forex from outside India, for some foreign securities outside India. If I had acquired that when I was a PROI, or if I have inherited from a PROI, I can still hold it. And even vice versa thing is applicable. A PROI can also hold properties in India if he had acquired it when he was a PRI, or when he had inherited from a PRI. That is absolutely allowed. If any person wants to open a branch offices in India, or any office or any place of business in India, make sure that you fulfill all the requirements. As notified by the RBI from time to time. These were the provisions which were given in section number 6. Okay, this was just the overview of capital account transaction that is given up here. Now, how do we classify these capital account transactions? Let's understand that. Capital account transactions are divided into main 3 categories. Okay, main 3 categories. First one is, let's take it up this way. First one, there are two transactions which are not at all prohibited, means which are freely allowed. Okay, what are those two transactions? First one is repayment of loan, that is amortization of loans. And next one is if there is any depreciation in the investment value, in the investment that we have done, and if we want to maintain a minimum level of investment, then the top up to the investments that we are doing, for that there is no approvals that is required. So these are the two transactions which can be freely undertaken. Then the second part is going to be that 5 transactions which are totally prohibited for a PROI. 5 transactions which are totally prohibited for a PROI. Investment in Nidhi companies, investment in chit fund, investment in agriculture or plantation activities, real estate business or construction of farmhouses specifically, and trading in TDRs. These 5 things are totally prohibited. But if there is any NRI, who is a PROI, then in that case, we can allow him to do investment in chit fund business if the transaction is done through the normal banking channels and if it is approved by the RBI. That is one thing. And yes, apart from that, real estate business or construction here just excludes the farmhouses. Means if we talk about residential, commercial, roads, bridges, etc., then those are allowed. Means we can accept investments from PROI in those fields. So these are the 5 transactions which were totally prohibited. And the last one is the transactions which are which will be permitted but subjected to the regulations. Means for that we'll have to go and check those lengthy regulations, whether it is allowed, not allowed. If allowed, then subject to what terms and conditions it is allowed. those transactions are further divided into two parts. First one is the transactions which are done by PRI, which is given in schedule 1, and the transactions, second part is going to be the transactions which are done by the PROI, which is given in schedule 2. You need not do this list. You need not do this list because here all the other transactions are going to come, which could not come in the which could not come in the free transaction list or the restricted transaction list, right? So we can divide the capital account transaction into three parts. First one, freely allowed transactions, then the prohibited transactions, and then the transactions which will be permitted, subjected to the regulations, right? Now, another thing that they are trying to tell us here is, first of all, if you want to enter into any capital account transactions, then in that case, we can do it. For that, Forex can be done only through an authorized person. That is one thing. Another thing that they are telling, facility given to individuals only. Remember, in individuals, we had told them in current account transactions, they were eligible for LRS of 2,50,000 USD. These individuals can even do the capital account transactions. They can even do the capital account transactions out of the limit which is available from that same LRS. So in short, to people like us, to people like individuals, we have 2,50,000 USD available with us. Out of that, we can meet our current account transactions also, the schedule 3.1 transactions, and even the capital account transactions that can be met out of this. Then after that, Government of India had come up with a notification on 7th March 2019 that any transactions, any capital account transactions with the with North Korea is totally prohibited. You cannot do. If you have already entered into those transactions, please liquidate it. And further, you cannot enter into any new transactions. If you still want to continue with those transactions, take the approval of the RBI. Right? And you have to liquidate those transactions within 180 days from the date of the notification. This is what we had studied there. Then a specific answer, altogether different answer which had come up here in between. Suppose if there is a PROI, who is an Indian citizen or who is a person of Indian origin who has some immovable property situated in India, can he sell it off? The answer is yes, he can sell it off, provided it is not your agriculture, plantation, farmhouse, etc. He can sell it off, but there are certain norms which are given for it. What are the norms? First thing that you have to check is whether it was acquired as per the foreign law, as per the Forex law or not. Means it should be legally acquired. That is the first condition. Second one is the whenever you are repatriating the amount, the maximum amount that you can repatriate is the amount that you had brought in India to purchase this particular property. More than that, you cannot repatriate. And the repatriation will be restricted to maximum 2 residential properties. These were certain conditions. Which was applicable on the PROI when he is selling some immovable property here in India. And the last note which was coming up there is, suppose if we have availed any external commercial borrowings from outside India and we have given some asset as security, as mortgage to that particular person, then if I fail to do the repayment of that loan, then my authorized dealer can hand over this security which can be sold by that foreign bank because I have failed to do the repayment of the loan. Till here, basically, your capital account transactions, get over in all the respects. Right? Going on to the next part, that is your export transactions. Export transactions, again, which are covered in section number 7. Current account transactions, section number 5. Capital account transactions, section number 6. Export transactions, section number 7. Section number 7 basically just gives us an overview of the export transaction. It says that whenever any person is exporting certain goods or software or services, then in that case, first of all, we have to give a declaration to the RBI about the exact actual value of realization that we are going to get. Or if we do not have the actual value available with us, then we can give the estimated value that we are going to realize from this. We have to also make sure that we receive the consideration without any delay, and we have to show the effort that we are taking for realizing the amount on time. We have to show this to the RBI that we have taken so and so steps for early realization of money. Suppose if we are exporting any such services to which any declaration is not applicable, then too, okay, no problem, declaration form is not applicable, but then too we have to make sure that the money is realized and repatriated to India on time. Okay, now this was given in section number 7, but export provisions are mainly regulated by the export regulations, FEM regulations for export. Let's see what does these regulations tell to us. Now, if we are exporting, if we want to export any goods or software to any place outside India except for Nepal and Bhutan, submit a declaration which has to be supported by some evidences. That declaration should first of all contain about the value, either the exact value of the amount that we are going to receive or the expected value of the amount that we are going to receive at the time of export. Suppose if we are exporting the services to which none of the declaration form is applicable, no problem, but make sure you can export without declaration, but make sure that you are realizing and repatriating the amount to India. And after repatriation also, means after realization also, you have to make sure that you disclose it to the RBI, that yes, or to the authorized person, that see, so and so amount has been received against so and so export that we had done. So till now they were focusing mainly on the declaration that we have to submit to the authorities, in which we declare the value of the goods that we have exported. Now there are certain cases for which declaration is not at all required. Okay, these are mainly those cases where we are sending some goods outside India for which there is no consideration involved. Example, if we are sending something as free samples, or if we are sending some publicity materials, if we are sending our personal assets, personal effects that we are taking outside India when we are going outside India for maybe as a tourist or something like that. If we are sending something outside India for repairs, if we are sending something outside India for trial run, if we are re-exporting something outside India which we had say for example, if we had imported something earlier, we repaired it in India and now we are re-exporting to our customer outside India. Here there is no consideration involved. If there is no consideration involved, then there will be no declaration that will be required, no proper declaration that will be required. One very important point that is applicable here is, if you are sending something as a gift outside India, then up to 5 lakh rupees, if the gift value does not exceed rupees 5 lakhs, then no declaration is required. Just a self declaration is required that the value does not exceed rupees 5 lakhs. And if it exceeds rupees 5 lakhs, then a proper declaration in that regards would be required, even though it is a case of gift, even though no consideration is involved. If it exceeds rupees 5 lakhs, then the declaration would be required. Then after that, there is some formality. There is some formality which is applicable. What is that formality? Now, whenever you are exporting some goods, you have to furnish declaration in form EDF, which will be in duplicate to the Commissioner of Customs. Original will go to the Commissioner of Customs. He will forward it to the nearest office of RBI after authentication. Duplicate copy will come back to me, that is to the customer. I will have to give it to the authorized dealer ahead. In case of software, we are going to use a form called as Softex, which is going to be submitted in triplicate to the Ministry of Information Technology. One copy will be retained by that same person. Another copy will, after authentication, will be given to the RBI, and the third copy is going to give, means the left out copy is going to be given to the customer so that he gives it to the authorized person. This is how the declaration works there. Along with the declaration, we have to give an evidence that we are a PRI, we have a place of business in India, and we have to disclose the values, that how much is the export value and how did we arrive at that export value, means the valuation of the invoice, how that has been done. All these things have to be attached along with the declaration. Once this is done, once this is submitted, once all these things happen, after that we can do the export. Now after export, the most important thing comes up here is within how much time the money should be realized. So export proceeds normally should be realized within a period of 9 months from the date of export, or any other extended period as extended by the RBI or the authorized dealer. If you are exporting it to the warehouse where you are going to stock the goods and then sell, then in that case the money should be realized within a period of 15 months from the date of shipment, or any extended period as may be notified by RBI from time to time. If the goods are exported by SEZ, EOU, a biotechnology park, or etc. by these people, then also it is normal only, that is the money should be realized within 9 months from the date of export. And suppose if you are exporting the software which is in link form, which is in non-physical form, then the date of export is going to be the date of invoice. From that day, within so and so time, we'll have to realize the money from the other country. right? Now, when we use this form EDF and when we use this form Softex, etc., then in those cases, remember one copy we were going and submitting it to the authorized dealer. So we are supposed to go and submit it to the authorized dealer within 21 days from the date of export, means after export within a period of 21 days. And in case of software, within 21 days from the date of certification by the Ministry of IT. From that day we have to go and submit it to the authorized dealer, so that the authorized dealer knows, okay, export has been done and now we are going to realize the proceeds out of it. Okay, we have to make sure that we receive full consideration. There is no deduction in the proceeds that we are receiving. The proceeds are received in the prescribed manner. If cash, then cash. If shares, then shares. Whatever was the specified manner, in that manner we are going to receive it. And the payment is not delayed beyond the time period which was given in the regulations. This we have to make sure. And if there is any mistake in that regard, then that will be treated as a contravention until unless you have taken the RBI's permission. If you have taken RBI's permission, well and good. If not, then that is treated as a contravention. Now, suppose if there is a delay in receipt of payment, then in that case there are two ways. First, check whether the goods have been sold by that party or not. If it is sold, then please try to recover that money. Okay, RBI will issue you the directions to recover that money from the other party. And suppose if the goods have not been sold by the other party in his country, then maybe you can call back the goods back in your country and you can sell it off here. Okay, these are the two ways, these are the two things that you can use, suppose if you are not able to receive the export proceeds. Achha. Then the next thing which talks about the project exports, okay, which talks about the advance payment against exports. Suppose if you have received some payment in advance, then it becomes your moral liability that you have to export the goods within a period of 1 year from the date of such receipt. If agreement provides for a longer period, then yes, you can export it with later also, but one year or the longer period, whichever is higher, within that much time you have to export the goods mandatorily. If there is any delay in that, then you will be liable to pay. You may be liable to pay interest at LIBOR plus 100 basis points. And the documents, whenever you have received the advance, first you would have received the money, then you would have exported the goods. So the document should be routed through the same authorized dealer through whom you had received the payment. Means the authorized dealer should be the same person through whom you have received the payment and to whom now you are going to go and submit all the export documents. The person should be same, then only you will be able to nullify that particular transaction. Okay. Achha, suppose if you are in no mood to export the goods, or if the other party says that already a delay has happened, please don't export the goods, give me my refund. Then yes, you'll have to give your refund. If there is a delay, then you might have to pay the interest. All these things can be done only after taking RBI's approval mandatorily. By default, suo moto, you cannot proceed for that. Okay, and the last small concept which comes up about the project exports, where they say that there are certain export of services which where we get ourselves involved in turnkey power projects or civil construction projects or huge projects where the payment is going to be received on deferred terms. So before entering into such type of project, make sure that you take the approval from the EXIM, from the Export Import Bank of India, or from the authorized dealer. And in such cases, the banks will give guarantee on your behalf, the performance guarantee on your behalf, which can be fund based or which can be non-fund based, that yes, my Indian person will perform his duties and I give the guarantee for that. That will be given by the authorized dealer here in India. Then the next two sections which is forming part of, this is altogether different part. Section number 8 and 9 simply says that if you have earned any particular forex, then you have to first of all realize it and repatriate to your country, and then you can hold it only up to a certain limit. Okay, now for this I had already made a summary. Suppose if you are a normal, suppose if you are a normal person, you are not an authorized dealer, then in that case coins you can hold up to any limit. Currency you can hold up to $2,000. In case of authorized dealer, there is no such limit prescribed, so you come under the purview of RBI. If you are such a person who has acquired forex before 8th July 1947, you can still hold it with RBI's permission. You can give it to someone in inheritance, even that person can hold it with RBI's permission. These are the provisions that you have studied in section number 8 and section number 9. In this, specifically $2,000 is super duper important. Okay, and most important thing is, suppose if you have gone for travel outside India, if you have gone for business purpose outside India, you are left with some unspent amount, or if you have earned some amount from outside India, make sure you bring it back to India and you surrender it, and you can hold up to 2000 USD at any point of time. Okay, this was all about till section number 9, and till here the 4 parts of your chapter get over. Now going on to the last part, that is your miscellaneous provisions, starting from section number 10. In miscellaneous provisions, the first few sections are going to talk about authorized person. First of all, section number 10 says that who is an authorized person. So authorized dealers, banks, offshore banking units, money changers, etc. come under the purview of authorized person. If you want to become an authorized person, you will have to make an application to the RBI. RBI will impose some terms and conditions on you about dealing in forex, etc. and then you can be treated as an authorized person. If suppose you have involved yourself into any contravention, or if it is in public interest to do so, then in that case RBI, after giving you a reasonable opportunity of being heard, RBI can even revoke your authorization. Even that can be done. And one thing that the authorized person can do for securing himself is, before he enters into any transaction on behalf of the customers, he'll take a declaration. Okay, he'll take a declaration from the customer that this transaction does not involve any type of contravention. Okay, this was all about your authorized person, that who is an authorized person. Now, this authorized person comes under the purview of RBI. So, RBI has got the powers to issue directions to this particular person under section 11. How to do a transaction, what transactions are not to be done, what are the, it can even issue some information, it can even furnish some information to the RBI, and it can even call for some information from the authorized person. For these things, RBI is empowered to issue directions. If the directions are not listened to, or if the authorized person does not listen to the instructions or directions which is given by, or comply with the directions which is given by the RBI, then penalty is going to be applicable, which is going to come in section number 11 itself. Okay, now RBI also has the power to do inspection. Okay, suppose if we want to verify the information which was submitted by the authorized person, is it correct or not? For that purpose, we can do inspection. If we have got incomplete information, to get full information, we can do the inspection, or simply to secure the compliances with the provision. For this purpose also, we can do the inspection. If we are doing this particular inspection, then it is the duty of the authorized person to provide us the necessary information, to assist us, to cooperate with us. This is their duty, which is given in section number 12. Then going on to the contravention and the penalties, which is again very, very simple. If suppose the authorized person contravenes the directions, or if it does not file the returns with the RBI, then penalty up to 10,000 will be applicable. In case of continuing offence, penalty up to rupees 2,000 per day can be applicable. Then there comes the general contravention. If you have contravened any provisions of the act, rules, regulations, etc., and if it is quantifiable, then up to 3 times the amount that is involved. If not quantifiable, then up to rupees 2 lakhs will be applicable. In case of continuing offence, additional penalty up to rupees 5,000 per day can be applicable. If you fail to make the if you fail to pay the penalty, and if the penalty amount exceeds rupees 1 crore, then imprisonment up to 3 years can be applicable. If the penalty amount does not exceed 1 crore, then imprisonment up to 6 months can be applicable then. Suppose if you are holding any forex, foreign security, or immovable property outside India exceeding certain limits, then they say that it is an offence. Then additional punishment will be applicable, that is imprisonment up to 5 years, and fine can be applicable on you. Okay, powers of AA. Now, whenever this penalty comes into picture, there is going to be a person called as adjudicating authority who will get involved. This adjudicating authority have got the powers. These powers will again get repeated in section number 16. Powers of the adjudicating authority involve to impose penalty, that is one thing. Then to do confiscation in India so that the property vests in the central government, and then to order to bring back the forex in India, or to retain it outside India as per the directions made in this particular behalf. All these powers are there with the adjudicating authority. He can exercise all these powers. Going back to section number 14, one thing is very, very important. Whenever a penalty is imposed on us by the adjudicating authority, we are supposed to pay that penalty within a period of 90 days from the day when we receive the notice. Okay, if we do not pay the penalty, then that imprisonment is going to be applicable. And if we do not pay the penalty within 90 days, then the officers can take action against me, and then that can lead to arrest. Okay, generally for arrest, before arresting, they give us a show cause notice. Okay, and only then the arrest order etc. can be passed. But if they are of the opinion, if the authorities are of the opinion that I am acting dishonestly, I have money to pay the penalty, still I am not paying it, and I can abscond India, then in that case, you need not even issue the show cause notice, and you can directly pass an arrest order in that regards. Okay, now during these 90 days, the 90 days time period that was given to me for payment of penalty, during these days also the ED can try to recover the penalty from me. Okay, he will take the action after a period of 90 days, but recovery can start during these 90 days, as it is done as if the recovery of income tax is being done there. In this way, the recovery can be done by the enforcement directorate. Okay, now suppose, say for example, if the penalty has been imposed on me, and yes, I agree that there is a mistake that has happened by me, but I still have an option that I can go to the compounding authority. And I can request for compounding of that particular contravention. And once I make an application to the compounding authority has to do the compounding within a period of 180 days. And whatever is the order passed by the compounding authority, that will be full and final. Okay, who is going to be this compounding authority? So the ED officers, enforcement directorate officers, or the RBI officers can be appointed as compounding authorities, and yes, they have to make sure that they do this compounding within a period of 180 days. Right? Then the answer that is getting repeated here is power of the adjudicating authority, the same three powers that we studied. Adjudicating authority is first of all a CG officer, or is appointed by the central government. Then he has the power to adjudicate the penalty. He has the power to do confiscation in India. He has the power to tell us to bring everything from outside India or to retain it there. But before he does this, he has to make sure that he gives us a reasonable opportunity of being heard. Okay, principle of natural justice is to be followed. Okay, then section number 14 and 15 we have already done. That is, within how much time are we supposed to pay the penalty, and compounding has to be done within how much time. Okay, now let's go to the other part, that is adjudicating authority comes into picture. Someone has to go and file the complaint with the adjudicating authority. That is, the ground level officers or the authorized officers can go and file the complaint to the adjudicating authority, and adjudicating authority has to take up that complaint, has to deal with that complaint within a period of 1 year. And then the AA will pass the necessary orders. If we are aggrieved, if we say that no such contravention has not at all happened, then in that case we can choose the appeal method. First level of appeal will be before the special director of appeals within 45 days. Condonation allowed if there is any sufficient cause. Next level of appeal is going to be before the appellate tribunal, again within 45 days. Nothing mentioned about the condonation, and AT has to try to dispose of the appeal within a period of 180 days. If there is a delay, then record the reasons for it. Last level of appeal is going to be before the High Court, but only on question of law. That is within 60 plus 60 days we can go. Within 60 days we can go, and the delay can be condoned by a maximum period of 60 days. And we cannot tell the High Court that please dispose of the case within so and so time period. Then going on to the last miscellaneous provisions, section number 36, 37, 38, which talks about the enforcement officers, which is very, very simple. First of all, this enforcement directorate is constituted by the central government. It is going to have such number of required officers to perform the duties under FEMA. Who are the types of officers here? So you have the director, you have the additional director, you have the special director, you have the deputy director, you have the assistant director, and then you have the other officers below the assistant directors. All these people will have to discharge their powers and functions as told by the central government. Okay, all these people till the rank of assistant director, under section number 37, they have also got the powers to do investigation, and for the purpose of doing investigation, they have also got the powers to do search and seizure. Suppose if you do not have enforcement directorates, then in that case you can take the help of other officers also. CG officer, SG officer, customs officer, excise officer, police officer, who can act as enforcement officers, and they have got all the powers as vested in income tax authorities, just like the powers are given to them under the Income Tax Act 1961. Then after that, suppose if search and seizure happens in your premises, then whatever is found in your premises, it is presumed that it belongs to you. Any documents, any assets, everything that is found there, it belongs to you. Until unless proved to the contrary, and this can be used as evidence against us in the court of law. Okay, then central government has the power that it can suspend either the entire act or some provisions of the act whenever it thinks that it is necessary to do so in public interest. It can, put some restrictions, it can remove some restrictions, that can be done. And if it wants to reverse it now, suppose if it had put some restrictions, now it wants to remove it, then for these purposes, it will have to pass the notification, and that notification will come into effect only after it has been laid down before both the houses of parliament. Okay, in the hierarchy, just like RBI was controlling the authorized person, similarly, RBI will be controlled by the central government. Means central government has the powers. Central government has the powers to issue directions to the RBI, and it is going to be mandatory for the RBI. It is going to be mandatory for the RBI to comply with those directions. And the last 3 pointers, first one is contravention by the companies. Whenever any offense has been committed by the company, then the person in charge would be guilty of that and he would be liable for that. But if he proves that he had exercised due diligence, the contravention took place without his knowledge, or he had not consented to this particular offense, then he can be released once the authorities are satisfied with that. In case any person against whom any prosecution was going on any case was going on, if that person passes away or that person becomes insolvent, then the case will be continued against the legal representative or against the official assignee or the official receiver, and the money can be recovered from them only to the extent of the estate which is there with the legal representative or the official assignee or receiver. And the last one, that is bar legal proceedings, which says that if there is any mistake which has been committed by the central government, by the RBI or any such legal authorities, and if they say that this was done in good faith, then in that case we cannot proceed against them. No legal suit or no legal proceedings can be filed against them. And with this, we are done with FEMA. Were you able to recollect the provisions? Yes or no?